Dio Brando. A name that strikes utter terror in the hearts of mortal men. A name that is synonymous with evil itself. This man, nay, this force of nature, has destroyed families, raised the dead in his service, gathered powerful followers through his frightening charm, and has even brought Father Time to his knees. He's taken pleasure from the pain he so callously caused. Everyone is nothing more than a pawn to him. Dio has used his power for the sake of his pleasure and to establish his dominance over the world. It's understandable why Dio is thought of as pure evil. But what is it that makes Dio evil? Why is it that Dio feels, thinks, and behaves the way that he does? I propose to you all that Dio's evil nature can be explained through his narcissism. Narcissism refers to when a person has a grandiose sense of self-importance that can make them feel extremely entitled to anything and everything. The narcissism is usually reinforced by the person themselves. You can think of them as creating a fantasy version of the world within their heads that makes them view everything around them differently. There doesn't tend to be any real-world foundation to justify their delusions, but Dio is a special case. There's absolutely no doubt that Dio is a narcissistic psychopath, but throughout the series we come to see him shape the world to fit his image of it. What makes Dio so fascinating is that he quite literally makes his fantasy world a reality. So much so that we have to ask, where is the delusion? But before we go any further, I believe a change of style is in order if we're going to give this series and one of its most popular characters the respect it deserves.
一つチャンスをやろう。
Aha! Yes! Now I look exactly like a 17-year-old anime male protagonist. So is your hat a part of your hair, or...? Just a little disclaimer before we go any further. Sometimes trying to apply logic and science to anime may be a pointless endeavor, because things just aren't always meant to make logical sense. It's called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for a reason after all, and I recognize that. But I am still going to try my best to provide that psychological character analysis I've established my channel on. Also, I'm just using what's been presented within the current iteration of the anime, specifically parts 1 and 3, to keep this analysis more focused. So I apologize in advance to all the manga and OVA stans. Now, before we start to question the legitimacy of his delusion, we must first understand our psychological terms and why they apply to Dio. Earlier I called Dio a narcissistic psychopath, but what does that even mean? Let's get the hard one out of the way first. When psychologists call someone a psychopath, they often are referring to either psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder, ASPD for short. Now you may be wondering, Nimbus, aren't those two the same thing? No, my king and or queen and or preferred complimentary title. It's understandable why you may think these two are the same, because the symptoms do overlap. Both psychopathy and ASPD can result in behaviors and attitudes like disregarding the welfare of others, displaying superficial charm in social situations, displaying a lack of guilt or regret, manipulating or lying to others frequently, and maintaining an inflated sense of self-importance. The difference is that psychopathy refers to the presence of personality traits that gives them the potential to do the behaviors we just listed. Antisocial personality disorder, however, focuses more on the persistent pattern of these behaviors. These behaviors are thought to cause some sort of impairment with the person's life, meaning that some aspect of their life is made harder because of it. Impairment with ASPD can look like an inability to follow laws and norms because of the disregard for people's welfare, leading them to being often arrested for crimes. They may be incredibly impulsive, which, when combined with their lack of remorse, can lead them to seek thrills at the expense of others, like stealing or causing physical harm. All around, there is a pattern of irresponsibility and lack of remorse for actions that can cause others pain and loss, thus making it difficult for them to be members of society. Therefore, not all psychopaths are literally psychotic. They can be fully functioning members of society, and that's what makes them so terrifying. Perfect documentary and horror film bait as well. Psychopaths can be remorseless predators who use charm, intimidation, and, if necessary, impulsive violence to attain their needs. They may feel very little emotion, but psychopaths still understand what emotions are. You can think of them as being well-trained actors when it comes to socializing with others. So, when we refer to psychopathy, the person can function well within society, while being incredibly capable of attaining their goals without caring about who they may end up hurting within the process. Dio's character during Season 1 of JoJo is a textbook example of displaying psychopathic personality traits and behaviors. The most noteworthy example being when he plotted his invasion of the Joestar family house, and the torture of its son, Jonathan Joestar. First off, Dio felt entitled to the Joestar family fortune. He may have suffered a lot during his upbringing with poverty and an alcoholic abusive father, but that doesn't make Dio objectively entitled to another family's entire legacy. Now, this entitlement speaks towards his narcissism, and rest assured, we'll get into that. But it also speaks to his complete disregard for the welfare of others in the pursuit of his goals. After being graciously taken in and raised into adulthood by the Joestar family, Dio begins to poison George Joestar I to ensure his inheritance. Dio saw the Joestars as nothing more than an opportunity to achieve the wealth, status, and power that he believed he deserved. Furthermore, Dio maintained superficial relationships with pretty much everyone in town. What I mean by superficial is that there wasn't much depth to them. The relationship remained on the surface level. He was well liked and revered by those around him, but he never established any intimate relationships. He had a posse, but they were nothing more than hype men. Even when he stopped torturing Jonathan towards adulthood, his relationship with him never deepened. There was no real genuine connection between the two, and yet he had everyone in his university convinced that the two were close. Also, can anyone really think there was any intimate relationship between him and George Joestar I when he was literally poisoning him? Yet George genuinely viewed him as a second son. Dio is a master manipulator, being able to create these superficial relationships with his wit and charm in order to see his goals through. We really got to witness his manipulative tendencies during his adolescence, where he attempted to isolate Jonathan from his peers and even his father. He took advantage of the reverence people had for him and spread lies about Jonathan, claiming he was a snitch. The people admired Dio, so of course they were going to believe him, and he understood that. Dio used his advantages to remorselessly cause Jonathan harm. In fact, Dio gained some sort of twisted pleasure from torturing Jonathan both physically and psychologically. Jonathan's upbringing was the exact opposite of Dio's after all, a rich boy who never had to experience the life-threatening struggles of poverty. Dio viewed Jonathan as beneath him because of their different upbringings, a pampered brat that never experienced any real struggle. It's understandable how Dio would not respect Jonathan, but it is his psychopathy that truly makes him feel no remorse for the torture he subjected him to. Now, I personally wouldn't say Dio has antisocial personality disorder. Remember, what separates psychopathy and ASPD is whether or not the person's life is impaired. Dio led quite the impressive life up until he became a vampire. He had the respect and adoration of everyone around him. He maintained relationships with others, even if they were superficial. He graduated from university with top honors in law, The man was built like a Greek god. Dio was the picture of success. He even stopped his torturing of Jonathan after recognizing him as more of a threat to his goals than he anticipated, showing that he's capable of self-restraint and self-reflection. He may have psychopathic traits, but these traits did not cause any impairment within his life. They just made him view and interact with life differently. Now, Dio's psychopathy just explains his ability to be a ruthless predator within this world. His narcissism is what gives him the motivation to use that ability. Dio is incredibly narcissistic, a personality trait that involves having an inflated sense of self-worth, often involving a sense of entitlement and a lack of empathy for others. He would be considered a grandiose narcissist, someone who retains the aspects associated with narcissism, but is also extroverted and power-hungry. Their strong sense of entitlement comes from a belief that they are superior to others. These people wholeheartedly believe in their superiority, which then leads them to exhibit several problematic thoughts and behaviors. Thoughts and behaviors that Dio puts on full display throughout the series. I already brought up his entitlement to the Joestar family wealth. His process of doing so involved getting the adoration and respect of everyone around him. In other words, being extroverted. His willingness to murder his adopted family for their fortune demonstrates how power-hungry he is. But we've already talked enough about his youth. His narcissism really gets worse when he gains his supernatural powers. In order to escape death, Dio uses the mask to forsake his humanity and transcend these feeble limitations, becoming a vampire and gaining a plethora of powerful abilities. Abilities he has no issue indulging in because, according to Dio, his humanity was the final remaining weakness that challenged his ideal image of himself. With these newfound powers, humans have become nothing more than tools to be used for whatever twisted desire he could think of. What is there to stop him from, say, converting everyone into an undead legion for him to command over? Part 1 Dio Brando uses every opportunity he can to satiate his delusion of self-importance. It's not enough for Dio to become an immortal vampire. Dio needs to become the new undead emperor of the world, further cementing his superiority over those around him. He needs to shape the world in his image simply because he feels entitled to it. Even when that plan is ruined by Jonathan Joestar, Dio still manages to survive and demands Jonathan's body. Even the way he describes his desire for Jonathan's body, is so self-absorbed, claiming that Jonathan has proven himself to be the only person in the world worthy enough to serve as his new body. Is there no end to your entitlement, Dio? Well, apparently there isn't, because the next step was to drain the blood of Jonathan's grandson, Joseph Joestar, to complete his takeover of Jonathan's body. He literally takes everything from 2 different generations of Joestars, because he can. The Joestars, especially Jonathan Joestar, are the only humans in the world that Dio acknowledges as being worth some sort of attention. Even so, they still remain as nothing more than instruments for his benefit. While we're on JoJo Part 3, let's talk about how much he doesn't care about anything anymore. By Part 3, he's overcome so much and has attained a godlike power that he can't be bothered to give a shit about anything. Sure, he still manipulates people into becoming his followers, and cares enough to send them to end whatever remains of the Joestar family, but he doesn't have the same ambition that we saw in Part 1. When Dio Brando became a vampire, he sought to rule and conquer. He became even more power-hungry and sought to ensure the rest of the world knew his superiority. But by Part 3, he's become so powerful that everything else just doesn't matter to him anymore. This is most likely why he didn't take over Egypt like he did Win Knight's Lot in London. It's beneath him. Everything is beneath him. His only concern was to explore the depths of his power and body. In other words, the only thing really worthy of Dio's attention is Dio. Therefore, Dio couldn't have gotten a more appropriate stand power. By controlling time, Dio controls the world and alters reality in whichever way he sees fit. It truly is the most frightening power this being could have. Now, the mystical creepy vampire mask is no excuse for his narcissism or psychopathy. As we've already established, both were present in Dio as early as adolescence. Dio has been a ruthless, self-absorbed, manipulative, and power-hungry person. Those unfortunate enough to stay on his path are not spared for even a second of his dominance. These traits of his, when we see him on screen, seem overwhelming. It's almost as if these characteristics are unusually exaggerated, which could lead someone to assume there is something wrong with him. You know, if we're excluding Araki's eccentric storytelling here. The lack of empathy, the inflated sense of self-worth, the need for attention and admiration, all characteristics of narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is a disorder in which someone has an abnormal sense of self-importance and entitlement that is accompanied with a lack of empathy. I'm not talking about some healthy confidence here, my people. I mean they actually believe the world is meant to serve their own needs. They may fantasize over their power and success without any real-world justification for it. With this combination, you'll find that people with NPD may remorselessly exploit others for their own gain, indefinitely. Now, you may think that Dio fits the description of the disorder, but Dio, being the special little boy that he is, doesn't necessarily fit within the confines of the diagnosis entirely, which is what I believe makes Dio such a fascinating and entertaining character to watch. NPD has a set list of criteria that Dio would need to meet in order to be considered for diagnosis, but there is one in particular that Dio does not necessarily match with, which made me reconsider my entire analysis when I was writing this script. The very first criteria: has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements or talents, and expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. You might be wondering, doesn't that sound like Dio? I thought so too at first, but the fact of the matter is that Dio, without any exaggeration, is superior. As a human, Dio was an exceptionally successful man. He had the respect and adoration of everyone around him, achieved a college education in law, and was possibly in peak athletic shape. He overcame death by becoming a vampire, then took over a castle and ruled over the land, turning others into his undead servants and army. Afterward, he got his head severed, only to then return and take the body of the person who did it. To top this list off, he can now control time as he pleases. Even with the time limit, it's still a reality-bending power. It's Dio's world. The rest of humanity is just living in it. This, however, changes when he fights Jotaro. At first, he believes that, like everyone else, Jotaro would be just another denizen of his frozen world. But when Jotaro intrudes upon his realm, he freaks out. His version of reality is being contested by someone else. Thus, we see what normally happens when a narcissistic person is met with something that contradicts his fantasy world. He freaks out. He loses his composure and becomes so fixated at the thought of someone invading his world that he doesn't even think about killing Jotaro while he has the chance. Jotaro's defiance of Dio's reality by merely moving his finger was enough to capture Dio's attention. This isn't the first time we see Dio freak out as someone contesting his reality. Impulsive anger is a common response from narcissists when they feel their fantasy is being challenged. For as perfect as he thinks he is, he still holds a fatal human flaw. The combination of Dio's narcissism and psychopathy are what characterize him as evil. His psychopathic tendencies make him apathetic to the concerns of others, which makes him fully okay with doing what the rest of society considers evil. And the narcissism motivates him to only be concerned with his own prosperity. Whereas other narcissists simply indulge in their power fantasy, Dio doesn't. Dio gets results that only further prove to himself his superiority over others. First by completely changing his poverty-stricken lifestyle, then by achieving inhuman powers, and even becoming able to control time itself. Dio reinforces his narcissism by shaping reality itself to fit his vision, quite literally blurring the lines between objective reality and his narcissistic fantasy. You can't argue with the results. So, again, I ask you, where is the delusion? I actually do want to know what you think. Do you think Dio is deluded over his superiority, or is he objectively superior to others and just knows that he is? Let me know what you think by voting up here, or by leaving a comment. I personally think he still is deluded to think that the world belongs to him, but this was a pretty fun perspective to share with you all. I understand there's more material to work with when it comes to Dio, thanks to the manga and the light novels, but I just wanted to focus on parts 1 and 3 of the anime, making things a lot easier on me. Hell, I'm looking at this recording right now and it's going by 40 minutes. I did a lot of errors, so hopefully I can cut that down, but usually when I edit this, it only cuts about half, so this is probably going to be a 20-minute video, we'll see. And as always, my people, thank you for watching.